Hi, everyone. This is Shannon Waller here, and I want to thank you very much for joining me, because today we're going to have a conversation with Dave Logan, one of my very favorite authors, of a fabulous book called Tribal Leadership, Leveraging Natural Groups to Build a Thriving Organization. Now, Dave has a wealth of information and experience to bring to the table as we go towards creating self-managing companies and really towards building unique ability teams. So the wisdom in this book is just phenomenal. But before we get into that, I want to let you know a little bit more about Dave. So Dave is co-founder of Culture Sync, a management consulting firm specializing in cultural change, executive coaching, and strategy. He's also a faculty member in the Management and Organization Department at USC's Marshall School of Business at USC. And in fact, I've taken a course there, which was great, fabulous online programming. So, Dave, you clearly have a lot on the go. Is there anything that we've missed that's really crucial to know?
No, I think that handles it. I have a couple of kids, and I have a cat that's sitting on my lap right now. That's all that I'd add.
I love that. What's your cat's name?
His name is the Dude. He's named after the Big Lebowski because if people meet him, they say, that's a dude, and that's who he is.
I love every second of that. Well, thanks. I have a perfect picture of what it looks like to be you right now. This is good.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. So going back to our initial subject for today, which is tribal leadership, the thing that's just for everyone to appreciate, I mean, I read a lot of books. I'm an avid reader, and I curate a lot of the best ones that I recommend to my audience, which includes strategic coach clients and team members and people who've purchased the Team Success Handbook, which is my latest endeavor. And at the back, I have a recommended reading list, and Dave, your book is highlighted on that as being one of the crucial books to read. So the thing that is so amazing for me is this book was written in 2008. Now, I, like a lot of our clients, have a fairly short attention span, and I'm usually on to the new best thing. But the thing that's kind of amazing to me about tribal leadership is I can't forget it. I can quote the 5 stages at will. I can tell you a little bit about how to move from one stage to the next. So one of the things that's so amazing for me is that you have, with your partners, distilled down a ton of information and research into a really practical model that I think really helps people, especially those in leadership positions in organizations, but also any team member for that matter, take a fresh, clear perspective on their organization and see how they can make it better. And I kind of can't get it out of my head, which I really like. So I just, first of all, want to say thank you for creating something that's so enduring. And let's just make sure that everyone's on the same page if they haven't had the benefit of reading the book yet. Could you outline the 5 stages of tribes? Well, maybe we should probably define a tribe and then outline the 5 stages, because that'll be our starting point for the rest of the conversation.
Okay, sure. Well, the big breakthrough that came when we were trying to understand culture is what group of people helps to define a culture. And that probably sounds like an academic question, but it's really, really important. And in the old days, people would, now I'm talking about going back to the 60s and before, is people usually assumed that a company had a certain culture. So IBM has a culture or Boeing has a culture, just to name 2 companies. And if anybody has been around those companies, that's actually not true. That culture has become much more local over the years because people move around a lot in their jobs. Companies have become more global. There's a lot of co-sourcing that happens and co-location. So you might be sitting next to somebody that you may not work with. So a lot of entrepreneurs, if they're going to start service-based businesses, their group of people includes people that could be customers or clients or suppliers, or they could be advisors or spouses. So this idea of who constitutes the group is really important, and I think because no one had answered that in a really clear way, everything that followed from it got all mushy and hard to follow, and so most people think the culture is really hard to change, and actually we don't have that opinion at all. We actually think it's fairly easy as long as you go through the right process to get there. So the question then is what is the group that culture is built from? And we came to the conclusion it's about 20 to about 150, that's a group that has a certain stability to it. And in English, that group doesn't have a name. I know a team is usually 5, 6, 7 people. It might go up to 12. If it's in software, it could conceivably go up to the high teens. But there's not really a word for something bigger than a team and smaller than other stuff. And so we came up with the word tribe, and that's what we mean by tribe. So we're not talking about a tribe as in all of your friends or a social movement that you're creating that a business happens to ride on top of or something like that, or the number of Facebook contacts you have. It's a naturally occurring group of between 20 and 150. And with that idea, then we go into, okay, well then what are the different types of tribes? And it turns out there are really only 5 of them. And I think, Shannon, the reason that you can still name them is because we went out of our way to really understand how each of the tribes sees the world and the language that they use, and we tried to come up with a term that captured how they see the world. And it's a little bit crass, but it's pretty accurate to what people see, and it seems to resonate with reality. I think keeps people coming back to the lingo. And so what we call stage 1, so this is a ladder. It goes from everything you don't want to everything you do want. Stage 1 says to themselves, life sucks, that life is just unfair. Life is broken, but the tagline, if you will, is life sucks. And this is only about 2% of tribes that are out there, but they do not great things. They steal stuff. They cook the books, talking about it in business context. Mm-hmm. They'll go out of their way to make sure that they get theirs, even if that means stealing something from someone else. So these are potentially violent groups, or these are groups that will resort to criminal behavior. Again, rare, but they do happen, about 2%. If we go up one notch, there's only 5, so we're done with 1, now we're going on to 2. This group is very common. And it doesn't say that life sucks. It says my life sucks. So I can see yours is fine. If I had your opportunities, if I had your connections, then my life wouldn't suck, but I don't, so it does. And so when whole groups of people, remember, 20, 150 get together, and this is how they talk. My life sucks. Well, here's another reason my life sucks. Well, my life sucks because of management. My life sucks because we're not raising enough money. My life sucks because I have too many unread email messages. And they all just pile on top of these complaint fests. Then, as you can imagine, not a lot of work gets done, essentially the minimum to not get fired. There's virtually no innovation, so nothing really new comes along. And people will avoid any accountability. And what's really fun about it is a lot of the things that people try to do to make cultures or even teams better completely backfire at stage 2. So if you bring in motivational speakers, that just gives them something else to complain about. And if you do team building exercises like let's go climb some ropes or let's go do whitewater rafting, again, it just becomes more fodder for jokes. Now, there are ways to change it, but the key is you have to move it to the next stage. So stage 1 is dysfunctional as it is. That's, remember, life sucks, can move to 2, where my life sucks. And that may not sound like a great improvement, but actually for kids at risk, it's major, going from something where life is inherently broken to I now see myself at a temporary disadvantage. That's from 1 to 2. So 2 can only go to 3 if it's going to move up. So then what is 3? The tagline for 3 is I'm great, and sorry, Shannon, but you're not. So I'm great and you're not. So there's always a competitor, and it's a person. And so this is personally competitive. We see these tribes a lot in healthcare because doctors are trained to be the best, the smartest. We see them a lot in engineering cultures. We see them a lot in entrepreneurial ventures where the co-founders will often do this battle. One person would be good at closing business. One person might be good at raising money. One person might be good at running the overall operation. And then they get in these fights about which of those is more important, and the whole thing eventually degenerates. Mm-hmm. But stage 2, just to go back to that for a minute, is the case 25% of the time.
Great.
So 1 in 4 employed tribes that you bump into, their language set is my life sucks. And we wonder why not a lot of work gets done. Mm-hmm. When we go to stage 3, that's the case between 48 and 49%. It was a rounding thing, so just to round it, call it half. So it's half of all tribes are stage 3. And you see now why that's a problem, because, Shannon, if I'm great and you're not, and let's say that you say back, well, no, I'm great, you're not. So that might be a conversation among university faculty or management consultants or best-selling authors, things like that. Then let's say, Shannon, that you win, at least temporarily, and you convince me that you're in fact great and I'm in fact not. I then fall down to stage 2.
Right.
So stage 3 needs stage 2. Stage 3, the individuals in it, look at stage 2 with this absolute derision. You know, how come they can't get their stuff together? Why don't they show any initiative? There's very little realization that they're at 2, at least in part, because we're at 3. So we're great and they suck. Well, how come they act like they suck? Well, maybe it's because we constantly send them the message that I'm great and you're not on an individual basis.
Sounds very codependent.
So if you just pause there, now you see why we have such a major problem. So 49% of tribes, the actual number for stage 3. Stage 2 is 25%, 2% at stage 1. The vast majority of employed tribes are highly non-functional. Stage 3 gets a lot more done than 2, but there's very little collaboration. Everything's individual. So an individual might have a new idea, but they almost never have other people to want to do it. So you hit that block that no one else wants to work with you. Everything feels hard. It's very dramatic. There's a lot of gossip that goes into stage 3. So then stage 4 is not I'm great, but we're great. So that's where you have a group that coalesces around their commitments, their purposes, call them whatever you want, their values, their something like that, some core, deep commitment that they have. People begin saying we automatically. They don't have to be told to do it. They just do it because they look at the people in their tribe and they believe they have common things to speak from, to make decisions from. And the major hallmark of stage 3 is that values are individual. So, Shannon, I'm great, and among other things that makes me great, of course, I'm smarter than you are, and I'm more accomplished than you are, and I'll just go down the list of whatever I think my assets are. But one of them is, my commitments, the things that drive me, that's probably better than your list. At stage 4, it's really that we have kind of the same list that makes us do great things. And so at that point, it's really hard to compete with someone that shares your core commitment. So partnerships become very easy to form at stage 4, and collaboration is very easy. You almost can't not innovate at stage 4. That number is about 22% of tribes. And then the very last one is stage 5. So just to be clear, stage 4 is we're great, and they're not. There's another group over there that's not as great as we are. That might be another business that we're competing with. It could be another, if we're a big company, it'd be another group within our same company. It might even be that we save clients from themselves. So we're great, our clients suck. But there is a sense of a competitor at stage 4. At stage 5, the theme of it is life is great. And it sounds a little bit like people are sitting around and imbibing in illegal substances and dreaming a little bit. It's almost like, happiness and joy. But what happens is it's a pure values play. And people really see the potential and they see what's possible, and they have such a track record, having climbed the mountain, at least probably from 2 to 3 to 4. They feel like really what they need is a challenge that's up to them. So the great example of stage 5 that we saw, we went into Pixar around the time that they were releasing, I think it was Toy Story 2, kind of around that time. And we said, so who's your competitor? And we expected to hear DreamWorks, which from a business school perspective is probably the right answer. And they said hair. We said, hair? How can you be in competition with hair? And the reason was they couldn't render it. They couldn't make it look real. So what drove them, their values, their commitments, was artistry, perfection, beauty. And they felt that the hair that they were rendering for the characters in their movies didn't live up to that potential. So that's where this world-changing impact comes in. When groups ascend to 5, that's where this innovation comes that just changes everything, and they essentially reinvent the game of the industry. So those are the 5 stages. I
love it. Thank you for entertainingly describing them. That's very fun. So a couple of questions about that for me. So stage 2 sounds very much like people are a victim. They feel victimized by their circumstances.
Right.
And what I recall from reading the book is that you can try and address some of their issues, but then they say, well, yeah, but that wasn't really the problem. It's really this.
Right.
So it's really tough to get people out of stage 2. Is that right?
Well, certainly there's the
usual ways.
Yeah, well, what actually holds people in stage 2, if you look at it, is, first of all, I'm not on the hook for anything. So if something's going wrong, I only know one thing. It's not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm never on the hook. It's never my problem. It may be my problem, but it's not my responsibility. And the other thing is, if you have a natural comedian in stage 2, it's really funny. So I was with a group yesterday, people from executives in the food industry from around North America, and they reported that they have a big problem with stage 2, And the reason is because as people are, taking their smoke breaks, that actually does still happen in a few industries, that they would get together and just make fun of everything that was going on in the company. So in the midst of this sarcastic derision, for someone to stand up and say, well, how come you don't take responsibility for what's going on? That just becomes the fodder of the next joke. So that's what keeps people in stage 2. I'm never on the hook. And it's really funny. I don't feel good about myself at the end of the day. I probably feel really tired, burned out, haven't accomplished anything, probably don't feel great about my life in general. Probably go home and sit down on my lazy boy and watch Jerry Springer, but because I have to find something that I look good in comparison to. But, it's a real problem at stage 2. But the way you get people out of it is actually mentoring. It's one-on-one. So if you find the ringleader in stage 2, the person who's bringing everyone else down, and you can flip that person into stage 3, then they could potentially become the on-ramp for other people in that group to move up also. So when you understand that you raise 2 to 3 by finding these individual relationships, forming what are called dyads, 2-person relationships, you find the ringleader, and Shannon, you would go to the ringleader and say, yeah, I think you have potential. Let me invest some time. Let's see if we can really bring your impact into this company, because you have a lot to offer. If you pick the right person, they might agree. You essentially coach them or mentor them. And there'll be a point of epiphany where they say, I'm great. How come everybody else around me sucks so bad? So they have moved from stage 2 to 3. And then you find somebody else that they're working with, maybe another ringleader, and say, can you do for that person what I did for you? And they'll say, but I'm great and they suck. Well, right, but could you make them, pardon the expression, suck less? Then you get this mentoring that snakes its way through the tribe. And a whole tribe can shift from 2 to 3 pretty quickly once that mentoring takes off. And it's a lot more fun to be at stage 3 than it is at 2.
It is that. So one of the main conversations I want people to get, or insights to get out of this, is the sense of upward mobility, a totally different context. So we've talked about 2 to 3. And I think for a lot of people, at least the conversations I have, because my passion, as most people know, is entrepreneurial teamwork and making it better and successful and all of those kinds of things. And when I find great tools like this one, I'm like, I'm all over it. So most people that I have conversations with are either at stage 3 or they are working with people at stage 3.
Right.
And if I need to pinpoint problems in companies, it's someone who is, and this is in my words, so you can help me frame this, someone who is race status oriented, someone who's all about protecting their turf. And in an entrepreneurial company where so much is moving so fast and collaboration is kind of the name of the game, and they can actually really subvert the innovations and cooperation and teamwork that's really necessary to get the job done. So stage 3 is where I hear, fortunately I don't have to hear too much about stage 2 because it sounds depressing.
Right.
But stage 3 is a real issue for a lot of the team, certainly the entrepreneurs that I talk to. However, I know some of them also have been firmly anchored in stage 3 when we're talking about their teams. So how do people get from, so we talked about 2 to 3, how do people get from 3 to 4?
Sure. Well, I'll give you 3 things that tend to work. The first one is you have to really honor the fact and respect the fact that the person has worked very hard to get where they are. And you're talking about entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs as clients at Culture Sync, which is, we love that sector. I'm an entrepreneur myself. And the thing about that is, I had to work hard. I probably had to take risks. I probably had to be smart about the business plan. I probably had to manage the finances pretty well. I probably had to be smart about the hires. So you hear the word I, coming up again and again. Mm-hmm. So if you say, well, wow, you're really fixated on yourself, how come you don't stop that and say we instead? That just reinforces the need for me to further explain how much I've done for my business and why you're not appreciating how great I am. So it doesn't go away because you tell it to. In other words, a person doesn't move from 3 to 4 because you point out that they're a self-obsessed egomaniac that's demeaning to other people. In fact, if anything, it becomes sort of a game. Then they go out of their way to highlight how cool they are, right, because it's fun. They sort of got positive reinforcement from it. So that's one thing. You really kind of have to honor the fact that, wow, you've worked really hard and gotten lucky and taken risks and to get where you are. That message is very important for someone to hear to move up. Mm-hmm. The second message is that the reason that you have worked so hard is not just because of your ability. In part, you're put on the planet because you've worked hard and you're made to work hard. But, you've got something driving you. You've got a vision. You've got a value, a commitment that's the rocket fuel that's pushing you. And what do you think that is? And if you find what that is, and then find what other people have as their rocket fuel, their values is really what you're going for. In fact, their core values, then it's a lot harder to demean someone that has the same core conviction that I have. So as an example, one of the roles that I have is I teach in an executive MBA program, one of the better ranked ones in North America, arguably the top one for leadership. And everybody in that program has always been the best in the world at what they did. Always. We've got 70 in one class, we have 50 in another. And for them to realize that, number one, they're active peers with each other, and number two, they have the same drive as everyone else in the room, meaning the same values. They're there to learn, they're there to grow, they're there to network. Suddenly, it begins to shift the language. So, yeah, you have to honor the fact you're amazing, you're cool, let me do the Wayne's World, I'm not worthy in front of you a few times. And then let's find the real driver. And often people will shift into more of a humble mode because they remember somebody else instilled that in them. It might have been a parent, it might have been a teacher, but they didn't just come to this realization on their own that growth is important or development is important. I learned that from my mom. I learned that from my dad. I learned that from someone. So there's a real recognition that came from somebody. So finding the value is a second one. And then the third one is really altering the structure of the relationships that people set up. So Shannon, if I'm great and I look at you as kind of sucking, then I'm going to connect to you really for the purpose of getting whatever work out of you that I can get, which is not very much because, I'm awesome and you're not so awesome. So I'm going to connect to you and I'm going to try to hit your buttons. I'm going to try to motivate you in whatever little way I think works. But, I know you're not capable of very much because you're not me. And so at stage 3, people connect in these kind of hub and spoke relationships. They have all these hub and spoke relationships around them. At stage 4, that's not the kind of relationships that people form. They find two people that they're hub and spoke connected to, and they connect those people to each other. That's called a triad, T-R-I-A-D, a 3-person relationship. And the technical way to say it is that you have the back of the relationship between those two people. So it's not just that you have their back as individuals, you have their back as a relationship. And one way to think about that usually really resonates with people is if you think of a marriage, and obviously we're talking about business here, but just to use marriage as an analogy for a minute, the single biggest predictor of whether a marriage is going to survive is the support or lack of by friends and family. And the reason is if you're, married to somebody, that's a dyad, that's a 2-person relationship. And if you have a spat, and every couple eventually does, and you go tell your friends, my wife, my husband, we had a fight, and they really don't like the relationship, they don't support it, they're going to say, well, it's about time. Man, we've been waiting for this to happen for years. We've got blogs we keep. We've got all this stuff in writing. We don't share it with you because we wanted you to come to this realization on your own. But, man, you can do so much better than that person. That relationship is probably over. But if they have the back of your marriage, then you have a spat and you go to someone and they say, you're an idiot. That person's great for you. That person brings out the best in you. You see the world the same way. You've got the same dream that you're building. You're different people, different skills, different capacities, but really that you're on the same page. You're not going to find better than that. Then that marriage is probably going to work. So think about that in the context of business. If you created those triadic relationships around you, a natural byproduct of that is now all of those people are going to have the back of the relationship that you have with people. So the relationships around you become much stronger, more bulletproof, less prone to, derailment, really strong. And if those relationships are with people that are going to give you money or that are going to be clients for you or potentially employees for you, now we've got that kind of stage 4 culture where, that's something that's built to really do some pretty serious impact in the world. So those are the 3 things. One is you have to honor the fact that you've worked really hard to get here. Don't take anything away from that. Number 2 is find the core value behind the person that's pushing the person and find that value or one similar to it in people around them, and suddenly the language will shift really automatically from I to we, And then the third one is go out of your way to then start building those triadic relationships as opposed to dyads. And that really moves people from stage 3 to 4.
That is really powerful, and I appreciate you delineating it so clearly. And I just to give a little personal testimonial to that, one of the things that I realized is like, I want to improve my teamwork because that's my kind of mission in life. So I have to do as I say. And one of the things I started being really conscious about was instead of when I was having a meeting, instead of just having it be with one person in the room, I would actually intentionally bring in a third. And it was really interesting. So, I have great relationships with our incredible team. They're awesome. But I realized it was like every time I brought in, especially if projects were going kind of by the wayside or they weren't getting traction, I thought, okay, you know what? It needs someone else's support. And so I started having meetings with 3 people and the results took off. It was kind of scary how easy it was. And all it took was someone else's energy coming in. And usually I pick someone who had complementary talents and skills and stuff.
Yeah.
And we do share the same values. So even for those of us that do have very similar values, I can still get dispersed and distracted. But when I brought that other person in, boom, the results were there much faster. And that's part of the thing I think that's so amazing about tribal leadership is you actually, this is not just a nice to do. This is not just a nice culture that you're creating so you're happy when you come to work. There are direct productivity and innovation gains as a result of moving up the tribal scale. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like how much more effective are companies who are at stage 4 rather than stage 3?
Well, so much more effective at the higher stages that our publisher, HarperCollins, the same company owns HarperCollins. It owns Fox News, just to put this into perspective. They made us take out our claims about just how much more effective the higher levels could be because they thought it sounded like hyperbole, kind of exaggeration.
Really?
And remember, that's the same company that owns Fox News. No politics in that, just
None.
Throwing it out there. What we found is that often the key performance indicators will move up 300 to 500% if you take a tribe from, let's say, 3 to 4. So if you take them wherever they are and you move them a level, then you get that 3 to 5-fold increase. And I know that sounds huge until you think about, what that would actually look like. So stage 1, they're going out of their way to steal stuff, cook the books. If you could move them to a point where they're actually not burning the place down, that would be a major improvement.
Yes.
So 1 to 2 makes sense. Okay, well, what about 2 to 3? Well, 2 is completely disengaged. All they do is complain and gripe and tell you why it's not their fault. Every sentence starts with the word because. Hey, is the report done? Well, because I got to work late and because he asked me for that and because the server's been down, I didn't. So there's really the minimum to not get fired is all that gets done. If you could elevate that to the better run organizations in the world, which tend to be at stage 3, and that's sad to say that, but that's the truth, then you've got everybody trying to get stuff done. That's a group dental practice where everybody is seeing patients and doing great work, and they're not collaborating, but they're doing really great work individually. That's going to, compared to stage 2, that's going to be a massive increase. Well, then imagine that if you got your talent and you webbed them together so that they were innovating as a natural byproduct of what they did, it'd be obvious that one person would see a warning indicator about a certain client relationship that might go sour, and suddenly everybody knows about it. Everybody's working on it. You get these groups of 3 that are working on it, as opposed to every person toiling in silence, feeling like they're the only one working. Then that's going to be much more effective. And now we're talking about companies like Zappos. We're talking about tribes within Apple that have traditionally been at stage 4. And now it doesn't really seem so, such a big claim to say your KPIs are going to jump 300 to 500%. And then the move to 5 that's the iPhone compared to, at the time, everybody else trying to make something a little better than everybody else. Remember, we're great, they're not. Mm-hmm. So we can just make our next release a little better than everybody else, then we'll stay there. But Apple said, we're not going to do that. We're going to reinvent what this thing even means. So let's not even look at the competition. Let's design the very best thing that is possible with today's technology. And that was the iPhone. So it's hard to beat that. So when you put it in that context, it makes sense. Now, just throw in one other line. This comes from Peter Drucker, the person who founded modern management. We can't find chapter and verse on this quote, but enough people have said it that we think it's true. So I'll just say he's alleged to have said this. So Peter Drucker alleged quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So you get your strategy, but you're in stage 3. Nobody else is going to want to do it because it's your strategy. It's not their strategy. And at stage 2, oh, here we go again. Yeah, you went to some meeting, you met with your coach, now you got another plan that you're going to try to make us do. Yeah, the last one go not well. Well, this one won't go well either, but okay, let's give it a try. So they're dooming it to failure before it even starts. Stage 4 would greet it with at least a certain amount of enthusiasm and probably kick the tires, and if it's got merit, everybody would jump on board.
I love it. So now I want to make sure that everyone who's listening, who's in the entrepreneurial world, really understands how to grasp this. And one of my questions I was going to ask you, I'm so glad you mentioned Apple and Zappos, because I asked you, what are your favorite examples of companies, so we've heard about the big names that we're all familiar with. If you could talk about, without naming names, unless you want to, what are some of the examples where you've seen smaller, more entrepreneurial organizations adopt the thinking and more important, the methodology, the tools to move from levels, and what's happened with them? Can you think of a couple, I guess, case study type things that would be illustrative of this?
Sure. I mean, there's actually one up your way that I visited along with a couple colleagues a few months ago called B Notions.
Okay, great. B Notions. It's
B and then Notions, as in I have a notion for something.com. It's
cool.
An amazing company. And they're amazing. They know their values. They're living it every day. They're, an employer of choice. Everybody wants to be like them. They're very small. They're not public. They're, way pre-IPO. We bump into small companies all the time that are just vibrating with that stage 4 or stage 5 buzz. And here's what's almost always the case. People are enthusiastic. They're engaged. They're plugged in. They're innovating. Everybody wants to be part of them. Hey, you need money? Sure. Because I got some, all invested in you. You guys are amazing. And you're really investing not even in the strategy that they have. You're investing in the people and in the relationships they have. Because if the strategy goes sideways, they'll figure out a new one. They'll innovate real time. So, we bump into these groups all the time, and most of them are not household names. They grow into household names. When I use Zappos as an example in working with entrepreneurs, I don't talk about the Zappos that exists today because they're big and they're part of Amazon. But the little tiny Zappos that was founded in San Francisco, where everybody was living in essentially Tony Hsieh's place because they didn't have any money for payroll and people were working for, a little bit of equity in the company, it wasn't by any means certain that they were going to survive, but they had that stage 4 vibe. Or Airbnb, which is now a big player that's disrupting a lot of stuff in hospitality. If you're not familiar with Airbnb, I've blogged about both those companies, about Bmotions and about Airbnb.com. Airbnb is now getting, sort of big. We went and visited them when they were really small, and I mean, again, if they would have said at the end of the meeting, we want some money, are you willing to invest? I would have pulled out my checkbook.
I actually read the story about Airbnb. I didn't realize that when they needed some money, and if you're not familiar with the story, for those listening, and they said we didn't actually have a bed to lend people, so we blew up air mattresses and we called Airbnb, Air Bed and Breakfast, and that's where the name came from. Oh, that still to me is somewhat hysterical. But that attitude of, and I love what you said about culture eats strategy for breakfast, the quote from Peter Drucker, because it's true. If a strategy isn't working, they'll innovate, they'll figure it out, and they're so committed to their vision that there's no stopping them. And that's what truly is worth investing in. I think a lot of people want to invest in something that's tried and true, but really it's the thinking that creates that type of innovation and opportunity. That's what we want to invest in. So I haven't read that blog post yet, but I most certainly will. That's awesome. So I think your experience actually goes along with mine, and I'm very fortunate in my strategic coach world to run into superb entrepreneurs who are creating small, what we would call bubbling companies. And one of the things that we find from kind of a value standpoint is they're really about abundance. They're not, there's a mindset that there's lots of opportunity for everyone. It's not a scarcity mentality, which is kind of stage 3 to me, which is I'm great, you're not. And so they just see the world as being a sort of magical place that they can have a great impact on and then also benefit from. So, and the other thing that came to mind as you were talking is that really, as you move up the different stages, there's an exponential nature to that. It gets exponentially better each time. And we've had this great beginning relationship with Peter Diamandis, who wrote Abundance. And one of the things he talks about all the time is the exponential nature of the world now. but we're not used to thinking about it that way. We're used to thinking linearly. So thinking exponentially is a bit of a shift.
Well, yeah, that's true. But, on the point about abundance and scarcity, I have to say everybody's messed up about that point. And so if we could just spend 2 minutes and clear it up.
Done.
Okay, for people to say, well, I live in an abundant world or you live in a scarce world, they're both wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay, there are some things, and I'm familiar with, Peter's book, and I know Peter. So some things are legitimately scarce.
Yes.
There's only so much air to breathe. And maybe someday we'll have the technology to make it. But for now, there's only so much air. There's only so much coal. There's only so much water. There's only so much gold. There's only so many people in the world. There's only so much, you sort of go down the list. And so some things are legitimately scarce. Money can be legitimately scarce in some companies. Mm-hmm. And then there are other things that are legitimately abundant, meaning if you give it to someone, you're not in any way deprived of it. Ideas are abundant. Technology by its nature is abundant because it builds upon previous versions of itself. Mm-hmm. And praise is not scarce. It's abundant. If I praise you, Shannon, it doesn't mean that I can't also praise someone else. The big mistake that people make is they treat that which is abundant as if it's scarce. Mm-hmm. So they treat praise, morale, culture, self-esteem, innovation as though it's scarce, and it isn't. But there's another mistake, which is they treat something that is scarce as though it's abundant. And I knew a lot of companies, I bump into entrepreneurs all the time that say, we're practicing abundance thinking as they're running out of cash. No, it's right now, it might be different tomorrow, but for right now, you've got a scarcity of cash. And the reason I say it is the single thing that is most highly correlated to innovation, other than culture, is scarcity. Mm. People feel like they don't have enough. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough money. That other company's got all this stuff. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, you're under-resourced. Again, I'm an entrepreneur myself. We don't have as much as the big consulting companies. We don't have staffs of or whole departments of people to do graphic design. We do everything ourselves. And that forces us, because we grapple with it. We, see it for what it is. It makes us really innovative. We find new ways to do things, and people often can't believe that we're able to turn things out with a small group. And it's, and here I have kind of a disagreement with Peter about it. Peter, you got to treat stuff that's scarce as though it's really scarce, and treat things that are abundant as though it's abundant. And he's absolutely right. People treat things that are abundant as though they're scarce. He's absolutely right. The nature of technology, it's very liberating. Eventually we'll get more energy out of solar cells than we need for the planet. But that's not the case right now. So if you just kind of remember that as an entrepreneur, treat that which is scarce as though it's scarce. Treat that which is abundant as though it's abundant. It's actually the key to unlocking a whole bunch of stuff and making sure you never run out of cash, which is the first rule of running a business. Don't run out of cash.
Never. Cash is king. Well, and to your point, the expression necessity is the mother of invention is completely true. Like you're stuck. You've got to figure something out, so you do. And I think where Peter would agree with you is particularly when he's creating the X Prizes, the various ones, he's extremely clear that there have to be some very critical constraints. And he talks about, innovation comes out of a very narrow range of criteria that you have to meet. You can't do everything. You can only do this. And he's very specific about it. So I probably would take a little bit more debate between the two of you, which would be entertaining. But part of it is, at least in the conversations I've heard him say, that constraints really are critical to that innovation. Otherwise, you won't get it. It's too general, kind of like when you were talking about culture and groups at the beginning. It's too general. You can't get a handle on it. You can't actually move anywhere because it's too broad. So once you really narrow down, through lack of resources or something else, the constraints, then you can actually innovate and create something new and useful.
Yeah, well, and so let me return this discussion, back to culture because this actually all does tie together. So yeah, watch how cool this is, okay? Mm-hmm. So the mistake that a lot of people at stage 3 make is they treat time as though, or at least kind of their ability to manage time as though it's abundant, and it actually isn't, mm-hmm. right? Time is truly a scarce resource. Yeah. And so one of the big ways that we encourage entrepreneurs to move, themselves and others from stage 3 to 4 is make yourself scarce. Make yourself a scarce resource. Don't try to fix every problem. Don't try to sit in on every meeting. Don't try to make every decision. make yourself scarce. And as goes back to the book Influence, the classic book by Cialdini. Scarcity is valuable. If something is scarce, people want it. If it's too valuable, they don't want it as much. So if you make yourself scarce, it forces other people to innovate. It forces other people to become abundant with their abilities and using innovation and other techniques, to make really amazing things happen. So a breakthrough that happened in our company, we try to, again, eat our own dog food on this stuff, is I realized my personal, Dave's relationship to time was very stage 3. I'm better at time management than anybody I've ever met. And that actually legitimately is true. I'm great at time. But I can't manufacture time. I'm not God. And so my, company basically did an intervention and said, you're really stage 3 about this. You got to stop. And I said, well, what do I do? I agree with you. You're right. What's the solution? And they said, we need to make you scarce. So suddenly I'm not available for every meeting. I'm not available for, to resolve every problem. And it boosted the group up to a completely new level. So I would say to entrepreneurs, make yourself scarce and you are likely to create stage 4 around you.
I love that because that's actually completely is correlate with strategic coach principles, which has a lot to do with do your unique ability. Don't be around for all the stuff you're not great at. Take way more free time out of your year. So don't work 365 days. We make people's years much smaller in terms of their working time. So we put some gigantic constraints. And what happens is they get a lot more innovative and their team steps up. One of the quotes that Dan says all the time, he says, you never know how good your team is until you leave, which I think supports what you're saying in terms of the fact that until you're gone, and sometimes until you create the vacuum, people don't step up. They don't realize that they can make a contribution because you're taking up room. Yeah. So that's a great transformation to talk about. Well, speaking of time, I want to make sure I honor yours and that we wrap up on time. So now for me, obviously, this has been a fabulous discussion of how to move up the levels, and you've been really clear about specifically how the 3 steps for how to get from 3 to 4. Now, the thing that I also want to reinforce is that you talked about at stage 3, values are very personal, and at stage 4, they're very much a group. Your alignment. I actually just had a conversation before our call with someone. I said, you might want to find people who are already in alignment with you. Because I think he's trying to convert some people and it may not be working the way that he wanted. But you have some great exercise. I know there's one I'm thinking of to help people have that conversation about core values. So could you outline that quickly?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I'll give you a slice on it that's new. This is from the next book that I'm working on.
Yay.
The untitled yet. It may be called Outrageous Leadership when we're done, but I'm not sure. If you get people talking about, this is going to sound really counterintuitive, but if you get them talking about what pisses them off, okay, what pisses you off? Sorry, and my mother, until she passed away a couple of years ago, was not proud of the fact that I had introduced the word suck into corporations all around the world. So I'm now introducing the word piss.
I find it quite refreshing, actually.
So if you get people together, and really, the question is, what makes you really, really, really angry? And you flip around what makes you angry, what you see as a value that you violated or that has been violated. So the civil rights movement in the United States got going because people said, what's going on is violating our values. So if you get people talking about what really irritates them, so a lot of entrepreneurs are irritated that big companies are dumb and stupid and bureaucratic, and why does that piss you off? What value, what principle does that violate that you hold so dear? And for many of them, it's, people should maximize their potential. People should make an impact. People should be expressed at work. There shouldn't be all of this, thing where you have to look like everybody else and sound like everybody else. So the value that comes out of that discussion is, possibly expression or possibly passion or potential, and those are your core values. And the reason I'm going down that road rather than the aspirational road is that really everybody can engage about the question, what ticks me off, even groups at stage 2. And as they then move into the discussion about, well, here's the principle that violates, the group in one conversation can move from 2 to 3 very quickly and potentially even glimpse stage 4 in the same discussion. What would happen if we organized ourselves around that principle that we've just identified? So I've been asking people the question more and more, what makes you really, really angry? Not just irritated. Bad service at a restaurant is irritating, but it's not outrageous. What outrages you? And look at the other side of that, and you will find the corest of your core values.
I love that. And this actually goes back to a profile where, who you really are is actually, defined by what you don't like. We're kind of optional about the things we do like, but we're very passionate about things we don't like or make us mad. So I like that because it really is tapping into the core, and flipping it puts it into the kind of positive thing, what you do really value. So I'm going to do that for myself. I think that's going to be a great exercise. So just in our last couple minutes, how, if people want more of Dave, even though he's really busy and very, very valuable. So what are you working on now? If someone wants to get in touch with you or read what you've written, or perhaps engage Culture Sync, how can they get in touch with you? How do you access Dave?
Yeah, well, people are always asking for a website that they can remember. So as stage 3 as it sounds, we created DaveLogan.com because people can remember it. And I'll tell you what you find if you go on that. We're big believers in free stuff. So we have the audiobook as a free download. If you're into audiobooks, you can download it for free. And we have something called the 21-Day Challenge that we're really excited about. It's another free thing. One of the things that irritates me is normally the top-tier leadership stuff is only available to people and companies that can afford it. And I just think that's not okay. Leadership needs to be made much more broadly available than it is. And so what the 21-Day Challenge is a video that gets emailed to you every day, and it's about a 3-minute video. It's very short. It's unfortunately for me. And it asks you to do something usually that you can do in about 20 minutes, so it's a 23-minute-a-day commitment. And at the end of 21 days, you actually will have gone through most of the big core learning pieces and even the personal kind of growth that comes from a really great leadership program. We've had thousands of people go through it. So if you go on DaveLogan.com, you can do the 21-Day Leadership Challenge, free audiobook, and a ton of other stuff.
Thank you. I now have something new about you to recommend. This will be very fun. Dave, this is an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. And I hope you're not tired about talking about tribal leadership, because I still find it incredibly valuable, and you clearly have lots of energy about it. So we can look forward to a new book coming for you. Any idea of when it might be available?
Probably next year.
Great.
That's my guess.
Okay. I will look forward and make sure I get the first copy. Anyway, great. It has been a great chance to reconnect with you. It's been a little while since we've talked. Thank you so much. I know that it's really fun for me when I'm doing an interview. I think, I need to share this with this person and that person and this person, because what we've talked about is so relevant to the conversations. And so many of the people I work with are developing their leadership team. And I just love what you and you guys have done to actually shed an enormous amount of light. So first of all, I want to express my gratitude for the work you've done. But second of all, in a very clear, accessible, and fun, playful way, kind of lay out exactly what people need to do. This has been lighthearted and serious-minded, and that's always the best of both worlds for me. So thank you a million, and I hope I get to talk again sooner rather than later.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it, Shannon.
That's awesome.